Hey guys, Bob here. Welcome back to the Co-Travel with Bob Piercy podcast. Today, I'm happy to have Samantha Leonard, co-founder, CEO of Stream Dental HR, back again, round number 2. Samantha, thanks for doing this.
No, I'm happy to be back on here and talking about HR. That's my favorite topic. So I appreciate you letting me be able to do that.
Well, the goal this year again is to have you on and other guests on as much as we can, as long as it's viable information, it's entertaining, it's worthwhile, and so that's the challenge. I've put the challenge out to a number of guests, so like who can be the most frequent guests. So you're already number 2 for this. There you go. So you're in the lead. Congratulations. Let's see if you can keep
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
I'm very competitive, so I'll make sure that I win.
There you go. But we'll force in the last episode if we need to at the end of the year, just to kind of sneak out the victory. And hey, the goal here is to kind of let's make HR exciting and viable and important. Yeah. I always think HR gets pushed to the background. I think it's one of the things that just gets seen as a necessity, not a want in terms of a business. And you're here to change our minds and prove us wrong as to why it's should be first and foremost. So the challenge is yours.
I'm up for it.
Okay, good. Now, last time we were talking, we left something out of the conversation, and we did it on purpose just because it was kind of timely. There's kind of things are up in the air, and but really, it surrounds the COVID vaccine. It surrounds, dental offices, when the option to get vaccinated comes true, and there is a concern out there as to what's going to happen if people that work at the dental clinic want to refuse the vaccine. So we want to talk about this now. So I'm just going to let you kind of go with it. If I have any questions, I'll jump in. But I guess that's the question. You own a dental clinic and the vaccine's available, and someone comes to you and say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable getting the vaccine. As a dental office, as an owner, like what's the situation? What happens then?
Well, I'm so glad that we're starting this conversation because this is something that's extremely delicate. It's a subject that actually balances between your responsibility and duty as an employer to be able to keep your team and your patients safe, but then also you're balancing your duty to accommodate when it comes to human rights. So this is where that COVID vaccine, it kind of blends those two subjects together. So just making sure that we are handling this properly. So like you said, it kind of leads to that next question, right? How should I handle this COVID-19 vaccine with my employees? So it's going to be a little bit of a long-winded explanation just to kind of be able to, paint the picture of what practice owners need to consider and what they should be doing right now. So, if we're looking at the Occupational Health and Safety Act, that's where it says that practice owners need to protect their workers, which means they need to have a proper health and safety program that shows, how they're removing all of the workplace hazards, let's call it. So any physical, psychological, biological, and chemical hazards. And now earlier this year, the legislation just passed that said COVID-19 is now considered a workplace hazard. So now the employer has to put measures in place to protect their team, protect their patients. So this is where enforcing a COVID-19 vaccine, or recommending that vaccine, I should say, comes into play. So it's just the same way as if we're recommending that our team members have vaccinations against hepatitis B, tetanus, so on and so forth. So our preliminary recommendations based on the information that's available right now is to really, instead of doing like a mandatory vaccination policy, kind of moving towards more of a voluntary policy. So this policy, though, it should be clear, unambiguous. It should be consistently enforced and communicated to all employees. So meaning this can't be just a verbal conversation that we have sporadically with 1 or 2 employees at one time or another. This is something that should be enforced throughout your entire HR program. So it should be stated in the offer letter. So when somebody is actually agreeing to work at your business, they should understand the risks of exposure of infectious diseases, which is common within our workplace, right? So they need to be aware of that. It shouldn't just be an assumption that they know that. And then basically stating that in order for them to prevent that risk of being exposed to these or contracting, I should say, these infectious diseases, proper steps should be taken by having the proper immunization, and that you are requesting those immunizations, those records at the time that they agree to work with you. But you should also state in that offer letter that if they do not have any of those vaccinations or will not be taking any of those vaccinations for either religious, health, or for personal reasons, then essentially they need to sign a revocable declination form, which in essence, they're saying that they understand that by not having these vaccines, they're at risk for contracting these diseases, and that responsibility is on them, not on the employer. It should also be in the employee handbook and the occupational health and safety manual as well. So just making sure that those policies are clearly outlined to make sure that they're well aware that here's how I'm keeping everybody safe, but here's also, how you're accommodating their human rights.
So I'm going to ask you to give me the term again, because I want to get it correct. You said that COVID-19 is now considered a workplace hazard. Is that the proper terminology?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I guess two kind of questions on that. I guess other immunizations out there, whether it's polio, hepatitis, like, are those considered the same thing? Are those different? And also, like, workplace hazard, how does that compare to things like physical injury from, like, say, a fall or a slip or a trip? Like, is this all kind of the same thing?
Yeah, so those are great questions. So the first question, in the ADA&C, the infection prevention control guidelines and manuals from the ADA&C, it recommends that all dental health professionals should be immunized against hepatitis B, and I think it's a list of like 6 or 8 different vaccines. And which I'm assuming soon it's going to include COVID-19. So those are recommendations, but they're not mandatory. We can unfortunately cannot make those things mandatory because it does balance against the human rights aspect.
But now, can COVID-19, could that, if the doctor chooses, could that be a mandatory vaccination?
It could be, but there's also going to be risks associated with that. So let's say, for example, if somebody claims that, because of a longstanding religious belief, allergies that they have against some of the ingredients in the vaccination, or for example, if they have a medical condition that could be compromised because of that vaccine, those are human rights. So unfortunately, when that comes into play, we need to make sure that those pieces are considered. So let's say, for example, if they want to make that mandatory policy, they need to also consider providing those team members, if they cannot take it for those reasons, you still have to find a way to be able to either provide reasonable accommodation, making a non-disciplinary alternative to having the vaccine, maybe looking at ways on how you can accommodate, maybe if they're working remotely or if maybe they're on unpaid leave for that absence. But if they do want to go that mandatory route, my recommendation is to please speak with an employment lawyer before you make a decision or before you actually terminate somebody, because then that's when that human rights or discrimination claims could take into effect. And unfortunately, like any bona fide human rights claim will trump any employer mandated claims.
Okay. And yeah, right now the thing is, this is all still so new that really it hasn't been tried. I won't be surprised if, to see that this does go to court in some fashion, whether in the dental industry or other industries, just because there are going to be people that do take effect or just are concerned about that mandatory application of it. Now, if now again, I'm not an HR expert, and I know you aren't either. You run the company, but you have your HR experts. But if I work at my business and my employers, and I slip and fall and I hurt myself and I can't work, I go on short-term disability and I get covered through HR in that regards. If an employee of a dental clinic gets COVID at work, if they can prove that, if they're a patient or staff transmission, what benefit coverage does the employee get? What responsibility that falls on the office? Like, what happens at that point?
That's a good question. Again, we fall back to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So now that COVID-19 is considered a workplace hazard, you also need to make sure that you have not only the proper protocols, but the proper administrative engineering, physical barriers, let's call it, and measures to stop the spread of COVID-19 within the workplace. Now that it's just the same level as physical, if somebody trips and falls because we didn't fix that broken tile or, that needle stick injury, those type of things, it's considered the same. So for example, if there was somebody who could trace that they contracted COVID-19 in the workplace. And if there was an investigation that came into play and there's no exposure response plans, we don't have the proper PPE, nobody's received PPE training, there's no documentations, no health and safety programs, no trainings whatsoever, then that practice could be could have like COVID carelessness is what they're calling it. So there could be fines and even jail time that's associated with it. So this is a big, big onus and responsibility for practice owners to make sure that they are doing what they can to prevent that spread or injury.
Yeah. And like, I'm just thinking about a number of things right now. Like I've heard just friends talking about just stuff in general. I know there's a number of large companies, and I'm not going to name anyone just because I don't want to get it wrong, but I think some companies are even offering now like 20, or I've even heard as high as 30 days of paid sick leave. Things have kind of come into effect kind of post-COVID. I know at the company where my wife works, they were actually monitoring people, and it was interesting because if someone came in and was sick and they determined that I was standing next to you and you weren't wearing your mask, and it was that was provided, but you still were, now there's a concern that you might be sick. Well, then they're putting you on 14 days, no paid time off. And so, but again, that was no paid because again, I don't know what regulations existed, and regulations are going to be changing throughout this. But it's sounding like, there's gonna be more and more requirements or pressure for companies to provide paid time off for employees who have been potentially exposed. And again, we are no way through this. And I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about this, either, in courtrooms, or just, what's the air quotes right thing to do? How do we, support these? Because again, in different industries, there's low paid employees. Like if they get sick or concerned they're sick, you understand, I can see why, if they're not being supported financially, why they are under pressure to go to work, even though they have symptoms.
Exactly.
Because they need to pay the rent, they need to buy groceries. This is just a big conversation that's nowhere near being over right now.
I agree with you. And there's a lot of these things that we need to consider because, like you were saying, we're unfortunately, even if once vaccine starts coming, it's still going to take some time, right? It's unfortunately, once we start getting immunized for it, it doesn't mean that it just disappears. There's a lot of things that are going to take into play. So we need to start planning and creating our contingency plans, not only what if there was an exposure in the workplace, but also, think about how much, like that term, like pandemic burnout, right? Or COVID burnout. All of us are getting burnt out about this. We're all, our workload has tripled and quadrupled, and there's just so much stress that we're all dealing with inside and outside of the workplace that maybe even that person might just be mentally drained or emotionally drained, that they cannot operate, right? So we need to also start considering and balancing that. How am I supporting the mental wellness of my team members? How am I keeping them physically safe? And so, all of those things, we need to just start having that conversation and start thinking about this, because it's a marathon that we're practicing for, not just a small sprint right now. And this all impacts your business.
Absolutely. I think you're very right too in having the conversation now, because the reality too is now, like I've got no idea as to when I'm going to be getting the opportunity to get a vaccine. And, I'm sure we've all heard stories of someone who's, someone knows someone who's been vaccinated at this point. Generally the people that I know are people that are elders, or living in nursing homes, and or they're doctors, nurses working frontline. There is the conversation, the debate about, is the dental office frontline, and should they be higher in the queue than they appear to be to getting vaccinated? But again, like right now, we just don't know. So, but again, let's have the conversation now. Let's put the plan in place now. If you're a doctor and you discuss this at the next staff meeting, and someone comes to you with hesitation over the vaccine, have the conversation. Don't make any decisions now though, because you don't have to, because the opportunity to get vaccinated isn't tomorrow. So, but again, a plan needs to be kind of put in place. So
I agree. And then, like you said, I think even before this conversation comes up, like in a team meeting, doctors and office managers should have an outline of what the practice is working towards, because, you might be caught off guard and accidentally say something that could unfortunately put you in, all of a sudden now there's discriminatory claims or human right claims. So we want to make sure that things are handled properly and this delicate subject is handled properly. And then, like you said, just being prepared. What if somebody says no? Like, what if 99% of your team members say yes, but that one person says no? So what's that next step? Are we going to just, obviously we want to figure out why they want to say no, or why they're declining it is because of a legitimate human right concern. But then at the same time, the employee does not have to disclose their medical conditions, right? It's because of privacy. They don't have to disclose that to you. So how much can you push to ask those questions? Well, is this really a medical claim? Like, how do I know that, this and this and this? Well, then now we're starting to creep into some really sketchy areas that could get us into a lot of trouble. So just really being ready for that.
So I guess asking the question that we haven't asked yet, and I think people are potentially thinking, I know they're thinking this. And again, like answering it the best of your ability. If I was a doctor and if I had a practice and if I had someone who came to me that for whatever reason, they did not want to get the COVID vaccination, and I was very, very strong on the belief that I wanted all my team vaccinated, could I terminate that employment with that employee? Would I be subject to severance or any accusation? Like, how protected am I in my business? Or like, could I do that? Can I fire people that don't want the vaccine?
Well, that is a good question. And the first thing that I would do if this was like a call, a discovery call or somebody calling our COVID helpline to get that answer would be, what do you have in place right now? Do you currently have a vaccination policy? Because if they don't, then how can they terminate somebody if they've never really understood that that's the expectation of the workplace? Right? Or if there's no health and safety program. So it's all of these places, all of these things that practice owners also need to make sure that they have the right paperwork in place so that they can enforce such a thing. If it's just something that's just always been verbal, then unfortunately there is going to be a huge amount of risk and liability towards that. So again, this is the due diligence time. Like, what do I got in place for vaccination? What does my offer letter say? Do they even know what the risks in the workplace are? Do I even have, a health and safety program? The answer is no to all those. Let's get all those pieces in place right now and then start structuring, if you do want to make this mandatory, having a good vaccination policy, but then also having that contingency plan if they say no, or if they do say no and I do want to terminate without cause, what that looks like in terms of termination structure. Because again, there's so many things that you got to figure out when you're terminating somebody. It's their age, it's their likelihood of finding another job, how long they've been with you. So it's just this huge piece that unfortunately we can't say, yes, it's always the HR answer is always, it depends, because there's so many different factors that you've got to consider.
Now, are they considering COVID-19 differently than other vaccines, other vaccination issues? Like, is COVID-19 heightened? Is it elevated compared to, again, polio or hepatitis?
At the moment, it's not, but I mean, like you said, as this starts coming out into the general public, or maybe kind of starting getting into that next phase or the next sector that they're deciding, who knows? It could be, and who knows what's going to happen with this variant and everything, right? It's just kind of everything's just still changing. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of information about the vaccine yet. And what the consideration is, they haven't really made it mandatory yet either. So it's just a lot of moving parts.
No, well,
I wish I had an answer for you.
Well, no,
it depends.
It depends, yeah. No, I think it's an important conversation to have. It's not something you want to, as a business owner, regardless of industry, it's not something you want to sit back and not decide on now, or again, start the work on now. You want to get in front of this, because again, at some point we are going to have the opportunity to get vaccinated, and you need to have a plan in place for when that happens, so that again goes smoothly, and again, there's no surprises. And I guess putting the vaccine aside a little bit, again, I'm intrigued by Stream Dental HR. As soon as I heard of the company again, months ago, years ago, actually, it definitely, it was like an aha, like, yeah, like that is an area. But again, it's not, HR doesn't sound sexy to a lot of people. And, again, it's something that we need to do. We need to
hurt my feelings anymore. Don't worry about it.
It's not your feelings. You
I said it doesn't hurt my feelings anymore when people say that.
But again, like I guess my curiosity on the subject is like, how do offices take advantage of HR? Because there's being more required of them. So instead of just doing the bare minimum and just kind of, checking the boxes so you can get by and keep doing what you've always been doing, like, how do offices like take advantage of HR to really make it a driving force in their business, so it can be that leading momentum, leading force aspect to their business plan that's actually going to help their practice really succeed, as opposed to just prevent them from getting in trouble?
Yes, I love this question because HR is really a business function. And I feel like that's where that big discrepancy is. Like you said, a lot of people think that HR is just, the rule book, it's just a policy manual, or, it sits on my shelf and yeah, I've got it. And it's 10, 15 years old. This is something that really helps to make sure that you have the right people doing the right roles at the right time to be able to drive the business forward. So it's so much more than just a manual. It's so much more than just a job description. It's really helping you find the right team members. It's really helping you ensure that we have the right support systems as well to ensure that you as the employer are being able to help them develop and grow, which in turn is going to help your business develop and grow. So I think once we start viewing that as HR of how you're managing your human capital to really drive your business forward, that's where, we're super passionate about communicating and educating practice owners on what HR really is about. And I think COVID really shone like a spotlight on that, because I think before we were just kind of, we were doing the same thing day in and day out. And all of a sudden we had this disruption and realized that my team is the driving force of my business. This is my human capital here. This is the greatest asset that I have. How can I support them to keep them safe, to keep them motivated, to keep them engaged, so that we're all working together and have this meaningful, rewarding career and making an impact in our community with our patients and, with my team and their family and so on and so forth. And I think that's where that shift of HR has really moved into this direction now with COVID. And I think it's a great way for practice owners to just see how important it is to just make sure that you're proactive, right? Not reactive. And I think that's as well another thing that COVID taught us is all of a sudden we found ourselves in a position we've never been in, and now we're reacting. And it's just, with everything that you're dealing with, it's just so draining that you almost want to be 2 steps ahead always and have your team know that direction that we're moving towards, because then it just makes your life and everything just run so much better.
Well, and if you talk about, selling a practice or buying a practice, the highest valued part of the practice really is the patient charts, is like, what patients are you assuming, or patients are you selling? The leaseholds, the equipment, the lease document itself, all these things go into helping, adjust and increase the value of the practice. But really, you're buying the patient base, you're buying the cash flow. But the largest expense of the practice, of the business that you're either buying or selling, is the human capital. And I'm sure we've all heard stories of, doctor sells the practice and then, half the staff quit just unexpectedly because they don't want to work for the new coming in doctor. And so that can, again, it's not the most valuable aspect of the business that you're buying, but if that goes sideways and goes south on you, like that kind of the largest impact and inhibit you to run the practice the way you want to run it.
Totally. And like you said, I mean, without your team, what can you do? Like as a practice owner, you could probably juggle, maybe run 1 chair if that, but that's it. So everybody literally is an extension of you as the business owner and an extension of the business. So I feel like practice owners have a really tough time, seeing, like you said, employees not being on like their profit and loss, not just being a line on that. Rather, yes, it is one of the largest expenses on the profit and loss, but how do we make sure that everybody's doing the right thing? Because if we have Susie here who has 50 things on her to-do list, and she's not focusing first and foremost on filling and keeping your schedule, then all of a sudden your schedule is not full anymore. So how do we make sure that we're doing that balancing act, right? And making sure that every single hour there's a return on investment for all the expenses, and we're working towards making a profit and growing the business. And I think once we have that shift, that mindset shift, is when practice owners can really, really thrive and go from survival to thriving.
Well, and every year we all want to make more money. And so every single year, I'm sure every dentist hates the day when, knock on the door and here comes the hygienist, the assistant, you just one by one, the team comes in, everyone says, look, I want more money. And so I wanted to talk about job descriptions, and you kind of touched on that, and I think this goes into, well, like, having proper job descriptions outlining, because again, you say, Susie has 50 things on the list. Well, are those the 50 things that she should be doing?
She should be doing.
In what
Exactly.
frequency, and in which order? But also, if you have that job description, it does multiple things. It gives the more guidance to the
Mhm.
employee as to what they're supposed to be doing. So then what you're going to value them as, and then also it's going to um, also help you justify whether or not you can or cannot pay them more. So
Mhm.
I think it's just again, other things that are just always so important, that again, otherwise you're just throwing darts in the dark hoping things stick. And are you really managing your business, your capital,
Yeah.
your properly? And
Yes.
how do you be successful? So again, I don't really know. I'm forgetting where the question is in there for you, but whether it's job descriptions or, again, using HR to drive the business, like, how do we do this?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I love job descriptions, and I feel like I have given presentations that are an hour plus just on job descriptions. So it's super, super powerful tool. So like you said, first and foremost, those job descriptions really provide that structure to that team member, the expectations of, here's what my daily responsibilities are, my weekly, my monthly responsibilities. Then it also shows how this role impacts the rest of the business operations. So Susie isn't just checking patients in and checking out, right? She's making sure that she's greeting them. She's making sure that the insurance is inputted right. So in that way, it's an easy yes for them, for the patients to say yes in the back, so that they can actually go ahead and make the payment at the front. So it's just really being able to see how that one position affects the rest of the other positions. But then, like you said, if you have key performing indicators in the job descriptions, then it's also helping Susie understand what are the benchmarkers, how are we measuring her performance to be able to show this is what success looks like for this role. So if, let's say, for example, Susie is the scheduling coordinator, well, your daily goal maybe is to make $5,000 a day. So her responsibility is to make sure that that schedule is booked so that we can get $5,000 a day. Now it's clear, she knows that, and that's also going to help that practice owner when it comes to doing performance reviews, when it comes to discussing those wages, right? Another piece that's also what I recommend and what we actually build out for our clients is also having a compensation, like a pay grade almost built for every single position. So in that way, if we have that scheduling coordinator, maybe that person is a new grad, let's say, doesn't have much experience. Well, we can't be paying that person top dollar. That person is going to take a lot of time and energy and hours to invest in them so that they can get to a top level. So they need to know what their expectations are. So if they're getting paid $20 an hour, they're a new grad, let's say, and they come in and say that they want 22 after 6 months. Well, are they meeting this criteria? Are they meeting those KPIs? If so, well, then yeah, let's, because it's a win-win. The practice is reaching those goals. This person has helped that practice reach those goals. But if they're not, then this is when that practice owner can have that leverage, quote unquote, to be able to say, unfortunately, we're not meeting this. These are the responsibilities for that level. Let's talk about this in 6 months. Let's work towards this. I'm going to help you and train you on XYZ. So in that way, we can evaluate in 6 months. We're reaching these goals and we can do it together, right? That's a completely different conversation than being backed into a corner and go, I want a raise today.
Okay, now let's say an office has a job description. Let's say it's 10 years old, and the employee's been sitting there working, doing the job, and maybe they're sticking to the job description which they had when they were hired. Maybe the job has merged and evolved throughout those 10 years, but again, the job description hasn't been updated. But now a doctor is listening to our conversation, hearing this, wanting to do this. They want to incorporate and put in place a new job description for that role. But again, now the employee was hired on expectations that aren't this new job description. How does that transition happen where I sit the employee down, if I'm the doctor, and say, look, you've been doing X, Y, and Z for the past 10 years. I want you to now do this, which is maybe a 50% difference in how the role is going to operate because I have new KPIs or new standards or new needs and desires. What does that conversation look like because maybe the employee doesn't want to do a few of those tasks. And
Mm-hmm.
so how does that conversation go?
Yes, again, it's another delicate conversation, because if they sign that job description, you know, for liability, let's say best practice right now, those job descriptions should be reviewed annually. And if there are any changes at any point in time when we're giving somebody a change of role, a change of responsibilities, the job descriptions has to be updated when that conversation happens. If not, like you said, then 10 years down the line, all of a sudden we're throwing them something completely new. There's a few things that can happen. That employee can be disgruntled and say, well, I was never trained on any of these pieces. This is not part of my job descriptions. Well, unfortunately, they signed that job description 10 years ago, and since it hasn't been updated, that officially is their job description. So there's some things that you need to make sure that we're having that delicate conversations, before we throw a job description at them, being able to sit down with that individual and just go, okay, well, due to COVID or due to the economy or whatever your business needs to make that shift, help them understand what goal we're working towards together. Help them understand, what are some of the things that, we need to be doing to reach that goal. And then having that conversation to see what can we do together to be able to make that happen. Right now we're getting them involved in that conversation. So it's not just here's your new job descriptions, take it or leave it, right? We want to get them involved and invested in it so that they can actually help be a part of the solution and not all of a sudden be resistant and be your new problem.
And so I guess, how does Stream Dental HR help the doctor through that process?
Yes. So like you said, it's a very, delicate discussion. So really kind of understanding when we're working with a practice, we want to understand not only their immediate HR needs, where they are right now, but also where they want to take the business in the next 2 years. And then being able to put together a good succession plan. So if somebody has been in, maybe let's say, for example, like a senior administrative role, and maybe this practice owner now wants to make them an office manager, well, what does that transition look like? Because there's a few factors that we need to take into place, right? We're taking this person out into a bigger role. So what do that role look like? What's the roles and responsibilities? How do I need to translate, transform their experience so that they can be performing in this new, bigger role? And then I need to hire somebody else to take over that person's position. So it's a lot of things that need to be considered. And that's where we work with the practice to really customize and really develop something that is going to work towards their long-term goals, and then being able to make sure that this is done in bite-sized pieces and gracefully. So in that way, we get the employees buy-in as opposed to their resistance.
Oh, very good. I could see how, again, if you make the changes small and incremental and you do it, like you say, every year, then it's no big surprises and it's a nice, easy transition. But again, if you sit back and don't do anything for a number of years and also try to make big changes, then the chance for big resistance and bigger problems.
Exactly. And that's where constant communication with the team members are also important. So not only just having that job description, but you should also be meeting with your team members every 6 months or every year for a performance review. And now a lot of practice owners are always scared of performance reviews because that's where they think employees are going to come in and ask for more money. But if you, for example, when we're working with practices, we set up in their employee handbook that performance reviews and salary increases are not one and the same. So basically, when those performance reviews happen is when we're discussing personal growth, professional growth, the business growth, and being able to constantly work with them to see how are we doing, what areas do you need support in? Hey, we're reaching our goals. Let's celebrate. Or no, we're not. What can we do to be able to get there? So just having those regular communications, documenting all of those pieces are also going to help you when and if you need to change somebody's roles.
Well, I was talking to a clients before we had this conversation, and they did performance reviews earlier this year, and they got a couple in, and they almost stopped entirely. It was so, for them, they felt so awkward, so nervous, so much pressure. It was just not fun. They weren't enjoying it, and they just didn't like it. But what ended up happening is by the time this process was going, they actually started, and I think to make it easy, they started with their best employees, their employees that had the best reviews, because it's easier than having a hard conversation to start with. but they got feedback and they saw change happening with those employees,
Yeah.
and those employees were actually getting better just in the matter of weeks since they had the first
Hmm.
conversations. And so that gave them the courage and the comfort to push through the harder reviews where they need to really sit down
Yeah.
and ask for more, have the more difficult conversation with some of the people that are, are struggling with the business, and they got through it. But again, yeah, it's not hard. It's not easy. I could, every time I get called into the boss's office, into the principal's office, I get it. And I know it's not easy on that side of the desk either to have that conversation. So, but again, like you say, more frequent, more common, yeah, have a two-way conversation, get feedback
Yeah.
for both. I think it's
It's huge. And I think, like you said, I mean, yes, it's hard having those conversations. And dentists are in the profession of healthcare because they love helping people. And so this kind of conflict goes against their grain, right? Of who they are. So yes, I can definitely understand that those conversations are difficult. But like you said, that shift in that culture, because we had that conversation to see how are things going? How can I help? All of a sudden, you're getting their investment in that. And then they start feeling like they're shareholders or stakeholders within the company and want to do more. But then at the same time, when you're allowing people to give you feedback, then you're also making them feel like this is a safe place. They're taking into what I'm saying into consideration. We're working together to be able to create a solution for it. Yeah, like a month or two from now, they're going to respect that. They're going to appreciate that. And they're going to give way more commitment to the business than if we never had that conversation, or if we did and you ignored what I said. Well, why am I going to go the extra mile for somebody who didn't really consider my feelings, right? So it's these things that we need to consider as an employer.
I'm going to make a stretch here and try to make an analogy here to actually dentists and the connection between dentists and their patients as well. Talking with so many consultants and advisors, one of the most underutilized tool in a dental office is the complete oral exam, the COE. And a lot of offices don't do it because it's seen as being a low billable time. And, they just think, oh, I'll get them on the checkup, but really, the purpose of that complete oral exam is to sit down, have that conversation with the patient, really discuss their oral needs, their oral health, talk about the future. If this happens, what type of treatment would you like? Would you prefer an implant or a bridge or an extraction? To really understand and also educate what you can do in the practice to help
Mhm.
that patient. And then throughout the year, you have, the 6-month hygiene checkup and recall exams to kind of touch base. But if you don't do that, if you don't have that complete oral exam, if you don't have that communication, that understanding with the patient, when all of a sudden the need for that big case arises, you have less to draw on because you haven't had that connection with the patient. And again, and then I'm seeing this as being the same opportunity with your team member to have that connection point. So if something goes wrong, you can sit down, you can reconnect based on the relationship you have, because you spent the time building that human connection that you can hopefully address and get past whatever issue has arisen. And again, go on to being successful and running successful businesses and both growing your careers. So did that work?
Wow, that was really good. I was just sitting here and just nodding, and I'm just very impressed.
There
I'm
you
going to
go.
borrow that. I'm going to
Hey,
borrow that, if
it's
that's all
it's
right.
yeah, it's yours to take. Yeah, please do, please do. Um, Now another thing. So obviously, there's always a cost to everything, and so I know people do hesitate whenever something's brought up. There's always, and honestly, dentists are being sold constantly, whether it's insurance, investment, salespeople, reps, services like yours, website marketing, everything. There's, their doors always getting knocked on, always getting kicked in.
Mhm.
Um, but I wanted to talk about and bring up and touch on some funding opportunities that actually do exist that I don't think a lot of people know about. And so the Canadian Alberta Job Grant,
Mhm.
and it's something that, so what is that, and how can the doctors actually incorporate that into their practice, take advantage of that?
Yeah, yeah. So the Canada Alberta Job Grant is a great program to be able to help employers really train and support and up level their team member skills. So this is something that can be utilized for any courses that maybe you want to take your team members on, and that could actually subsidize around 60% of the cost of that course. And I believe it's up to $10,000 per year a business owner is eligible to use. So, for example, we were helping practices utilize this program for our HR management course that we're running starting next month, to to be able to help their practice managers really up level their HR skills so that they understand how to have the basic tools for things like interviewing, onboarding, discrimination, dealing with employee grievances and terminations, because since office managers are the unofficial HR managers. They don't have that background. They don't have that schooling. So we really want to help empower office managers. And we were able to sign up quite a few practices utilizing that Canada Alberta job grant. So it's a great program to use.
Now there are some restrictions with the grant. I think you said earlier, they need to apply for the grant roughly 20 days prior to the course starting. Is that correct?
20 business days. So it's almost like a month-ish before the program starts. So in that way, they have enough time to review it and all those things. And, they're always bombarded at the government. So it can take even a bit longer. So that's an important thing to consider. There are some eligibility criterias. So I can send you that link so that they can find more information out about the Canada Alberta job grant, or if they want to apply for our upcoming courses, then they can utilize that job grant as well. We've become experts at filling out those applications and getting them approved. But yeah, there's eligibility criterias, and then just making sure that 20 business days before, you can't pay for the course beforehand. You have to get it approved first, and then you could submit for payment. But all of those pieces, we're happy to help practices if they're looking to utilize that for our courses in the future.
So right now we are recording this in early mid-February. And so you do have a course coming up early March. So again, at this time, it's kind of too late to apply for the grant for this particular course. But if you guys have courses later throughout the year, again, as long as the doctor applies for this grant, 20 business days prior to, okay, they can. Now, are there a limited number of grants available? Can a doctor apply for multiple grants in the same year for different courses? Like, what are the restrictions on that? Are you aware of the restrictions?
I believe they have a maximum of $10,000 per year. I'm pretty sure, but don't quote me, I'm pretty sure it's per employee. So for example, if it was one office manager, they would only have $10,000 that they could utilize and get credited for that one employee for that 1 year.
Okay, but if they had, they say their entire team, they could take potentially $10,000 per employee throughout the year, and then they can apply for it again next year. If there's for more CE, more education. And again, yeah, if you provide me the link, I'll definitely include that in the show notes. I included it in the email that I send out, so people can go and look into that more. And so you guys are running webinars. You guys are doing stuff currently. Are you guys planning on doing stuff like monthly, quarterly throughout the year? What's your schedule looking like?
We're planning on doing it quarterly. So this one is a 12-week program. The next one is going to be starting, I believe, June 15th. And that one is for health and safety. So that one is dealing with more of that occupational health and safety aspect of it, talking about, sensitive topics, but things that are important for practice owners to make sure that they are handling properly. So sexual harassment, violence in the workplace. We're dealing with COVID in the workplace. What you need to do to have a proper occupational health and safety program. So that's one that we're going to be launching in June. Again, that's 12 weeks. And then we're hoping to relaunch the HR bootcamp probably September-ish, when everybody's going back to school. It'll be a nice little back to school for dental professionals. And again, it's for anybody in the workplace who is looking to be able to grow. It doesn't have to be office managers, anybody who's handling HR or health and safety or just wants to improve their leadership skills, then that is available.
No, fantastic. That's awesome. Wow, we've covered a lot, and I'm just looking at the clock here, and I feel like we could both talk about this surprisingly for a lot longer. Again, it's HR is boring. This is, come on, how can we have such a conversation over HR? Before we do wrap this up, is there anything else you wanted to touch on and get out there, or is that it? Have we talked about enough?
Oh, no way! I could keep going. I do this all day. Yeah, we have a webinar coming up. So hopefully, depending on when your listeners are listening to this, we have a webinar coming up March 4th on how to lead your team and your business to greatness. So really just helping show how HR is a business function. How do we motivate and engage our team? How do we drive the business forward? And how do we keep our business compliant? And the same thing, we're running every quarter. We're doing different webinars on different topics. So, June, July is going to be the health and safety month. So we'll have another program, another webinar on health and safety. And then in September, we're probably running another one about buying and selling your business, things that you need to know about your human capital. Like we were already talking about. So so some great things. Just visit our website, sign up for our mailing list. So in that way you can be in the know. We constantly send out weekly information about, legislation changes, COVID vaccines, upcoming webinars and courses that we have, and just keeping you up to date with HR.
And social media, where can people find you?
We're all over the social media world. LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search Stream Dental HR and you can find us.
And you guys have also recently launched a podcast as well.
Right. I already forgot about that. Thank you. Yes, you can find our podcast on Spotify and on iTunes, and it's called The Dental CEO Show. The
Dental CEO Show. So I'm going to do my best to get links to all those in the show notes in the email.
Sorry also, about that. It's going to be a long email.
It is going to be a long email. And also, I'm assuming on your website, you guys have a particular page dedicated to upcoming courses.
Yes. Yeah. So we have it's called HR and OHS course. So if you click on that, it'll give you all the information about the current course that's coming up, and then the one in June, and then they can save their spot.
So what we'll do again is I'll put a link to that page. So again, if people are listening to this in time for the March 4th course, awesome. If March 4th is passed, again, there'll be a newer course up at that point. They can look at it and register as well. So hey,
thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. Again, like I said, the challenge is out there to see how many times we can do have you on this year. So you are in the lead, second time this year so far. So that's fantastic. And again, thanks so much for doing this, Samantha. And for everyone listening, thanks so much for supporting the show, you guys. Any feedback, please let us know. And go check out Samantha's podcast. Again, the name is what?
The Dental CEO Show.
The Dental CEO Show. Okay, Spotify, iTunes. Awesome. So thanks so much. Hey, have a great weekend. And
thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye for now.